Every single night for 30 years, she stood perfectly still under a blinding white spotlight, drowning in a stadium's worth of noise. To the world, she was the stable heartbeat of Fleetwood Mac, the effortless hitmaker who stayed grounded while everyone else burned down the house. But behind the serene smile and the steady hands on the keyboard lay a calculated illusion. Christine McVie was running a masterclass in psychological survival, living a deeply fractured double life right in front of our eyes. How did she live a double life for 30 years? There is a distinct, unsettling kind of magic in watching someone hide entirely in plain sight. If you look back at old concert footage from Fleetwood Mac's absolute peak in the late 70s and early 80s, say, a sold-out night at the Oakland Coliseum or the Forum in Los Angeles, your eyes are naturally drawn to the front stage theater. You watch Stevie Nicks spin like a gothic top in oceans of black chiffon, casting spells with a tambourine. You watch Lindsey Buckingham stalk the stage edges, sweat-drenched and wild-eyed, ripping solos out of his guitar like he's trying to punish the strings for some unspoken crime. They were the lightning, volatile and loud, publicizing their wreckage for 70,000 people a night. But if you pan just slightly to the left, standing behind a massive, solid block of a Hammond organ, you see Christine McVie. She is the image of absolute, unflinching composure. Her blonde hair is perfectly parted, framing a face that rarely betrays an ounce of the chaos swirling around her. Her hands move across the keys with the cool, unbothered precision of a studio musician who just happened to wander onto a stadium stage. She looks like the only adult in a room full of wildly gifted, self-destructive children. For 3 decades, the prevailing narrative surrounding Fleetwood Mac was built on this exact imagery. Christine was the anchor. Christine was the normal one. Christine was the sanctuary of sanity that kept the entire multi-million-dollar machine from flying off the tracks. It was a beautiful lie. And it was a lie she meticulously maintained for 30 years because the alternative meant total psychological annihilation. What the audiences buying out those stadiums didn't realize, what even the most obsessive rock journalists of the era failed to see beneath the surface, was that Christine McVie's legendary stability wasn't a personality trait. It was a shield. It was a highly calculated, deeply private double life enacted on a global stage. While Stevie and Lindsey actively weaponized their personal trauma, transforming their mutual heartbreak into a highly profitable, nightly theatrical war, Christine understood a darker truth. If she let the reality of her environment actually touch her, she would drown. The woman whom millions of fans thought they knew was actually an elaborate, beautifully styled corporate avatar. The real woman was living an entirely separate existence inside her own head, locked away in a private mental fortress. She was an intensely private, quiet British introvert who possessed the soul of an artisan, but who had somehow become trapped inside the most notoriously toxic, substance-fueled, emotionally cannibalistic rock band on the planet. To survive that environment without losing her mind, Christine split herself clean in two. There was Christine McVie, the effortlessly cool hit-making rock goddess who could drink champagne, snort substance, and command an arena without breaking a sweat. And then there was the hidden self, the woman who spent 30 years quietly looking at the exit signs, counting down the days until she could finally stop pretending. This wasn't just a matter of keeping secrets, it was a matter of total compartmentalization. When you are forced to perform night after night, standing just a few feet away from your ex-husband who is playing the bass line to a song you wrote about your secret lover, normal human emotional processing isn't an option. You cannot afford to be vulnerable. You cannot afford to let the cracks show. So, Christine built a wall. She became an invisible giant, letting the public focus entirely on the Stevie and Lindsey soap opera while she quietly executed a 30-year jailbreak in slow motion. The true tragedy of her career isn't that she was overshadowed by her more flamboyant bandmates. It's that she actively chose to disappear into the background just to keep her humanity intact. She gave the world some of the most optimistic, sun-drenched pop anthems in human history, all while living in a state of profound, self-imposed isolation, waiting for the exact moment she could drop the curtain and finally step out of the light. So to get to the fortress she built around herself in Los Angeles, you have to look at the quiet English soil where she actually rooted. Long before she was a polished centerpiece of West Coast stadium rock, Christine McVie was Christine Perfect, a name that sounds like a Hollywood invention but was actually just the literal truth of her birthright. She grew up in the damp, quiet expanse of the English Lake District, raised by a faith healer and a concert violinist. The air in her childhood home was thick with classical music, theory, and rigorous discipline. By the time she was a teenager, she wasn't listening to pop radio. She was sitting at a piano bench or wrapping her arms around a heavy cello, analyzing complex chord progressions and learning the strict mechanics of composition. But classical music is about executing someone else's perfection. Christine wanted to build something of her own. When she moved to Birmingham to study sculpture at the Moseley School of Art, her world split open. It was the mid-60s, and Britain was undergoing a massive, electrified blues explosion. Young art students across the country were abandoning their paintbrushes to plug cheap guitars into loud amplifiers, trying to replicate the raw, bleeding emotionality of American Delta blues. Christine, with her formal training and innate, deep-seated sense of rhythm, found herself pulled away from her clay sculptures and toward the smoke-filled basements of the local music scene. Her first real taste of the spotlight came when she joined Chicken Shack, a gritty, no-nonsense British blues outfit signed to the legendary Blue Horizon record label. In a scene heavily dominated by swaggering, aggressive young men, Christine was an anomaly. She didn't just sit politely at the piano. She drove the rhythm section with a heavy, syncopated left hand that could rival any barrelhouse piano player in Chicago. Her voice, too, was a revelation. Smoky, low, and laced with an authentic melancholic weight that felt centuries older than her actual age. When Chicken Shack released their cover of Etta James's I'd Rather Go Blind in 1969, featuring Christine on lead vocals, it became a massive UK hit. Suddenly, the quiet art student was a bona fide star. The readers of Melody Maker, Britain's premier music publication, voted her the best female vocalist in the country 2 years in a row, placing her on a pedestal alongside contemporaries like Sandy Denny and a young Cleo Lane. Yet, even at this incredibly early stage, the first cracks of her double life were starting to show. While her peers were reveling in the burgeoning celebrity culture of swinging London, Christine felt profoundly uneasy. The frantic energy of the road, the shallow praise of the music press, and the constant exposure didn't fulfill her. She didn't view music as a vehicle for fame. She viewed it as a craft, a job she happened to be very good at. Secretly, she was already plotting her escape. She openly told friends that her true ambition wasn't to conquer the charts, but to finish her degree, secure a quiet, predictable job as an art teacher, and settle down into a comfortable, anonymous domestic life. Then she crossed paths with John McVie. John was the fiercely talented, notoriously hard-drinking bass player for Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, a band that was rapidly becoming the kings of the British blues underground. Christine was immediately taken by his quiet intensity and his brilliant musicianship. Their courtship was an absolute whirlwind, a sudden spark in the middle of a chaotic touring schedule. After knowing each other for only a matter of weeks, John proposed. Christine, driven by a deep, romantic longing for a stable anchor of her own, said yes. They were married in August of 1968. Immediately following the wedding, Christine made a radical decision that stunned her bandmates and the British music press. She quit Chicken Shack. She voluntarily walked away from her rising solo star, packed up her keyboards, and announced she was retiring from the music industry altogether. Her reasoning was simple, traditional, and entirely separate from the rock and roll ethos. She wanted to be a housewife. She realized that if both she and John were touring in separate bands, their marriage would be dead on arrival. She chose her personal life over her career without a single second thought, fully prepared to spend the rest of her days cooking dinners, managing a home, and existing purely as Mrs. John McVie. But fate, it turned out, had a twisted sense of humor. In May of 1970, Peter Green, the visionary leader and creative engine of Fleetwood Mac, suffered a massive, substance-induced psychological collapse and abruptly walked away from the band. The group was left completely adrift, facing massive financial ruin, unfulfilled tour contracts, and a total creative vacuum. They were a ship sinking in real time. In a state of sheer desperation, Mick Fleetwood and John McVie turned to the one person who possessed the musical authority to stabilize the group, Christine. They didn't just ask her to fill in. They begged her to join as a permanent, full-time member on keyboards and vocals. Christine was torn. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to protect the quiet, domestic life she had just begun to build. But she looked at her husband, saw the desperation in his eyes, and realized that if she said no, his career would likely implode. She agreed to join the band out of a sense of profound loyalty, genuinely believing that sharing a stage with John would bring them closer together and preserve their fragile union. She thought joining the band would save her marriage, but it only institutionalized it. By 1973, the grey, rain-slicked streets of London were a distant memory. Fleetwood Mac had officially packed up their lives and relocated to Southern California, chasing a new, sun-drenched horizon. This geographical shift marked the birth of what would become the band's most lucrative and lethal era. When Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined the lineup in late 1974, the musical puzzle was finally complete. But as the band's sound transformed into a polished, multi-platinum juggernaut, the reality of Christine's day-to-day existence morphed into a hyper-surreal nightmare. She had entered toxic Camelot, a world of unparalleled luxury, private jets, and limitless excess, all built on top of a volatile psychological fault line. As the band locked themselves inside the windowless rooms of the record plant in Sausalito to record Rumours, the studio became a pressure cooker of emotional warfare. Christine's marriage to John had completely disintegrated under the weight of relentless touring and his severe, alcohol-fueled mood swings. Simultaneously, Stevie and Lindsey were locked in a screaming, violent breakup, and Mick Fleetwood was discovering his own marriage was over. Most bands would have imploded under a fraction of that tension. Instead, Fleetwood Mac chose to document their mutual destruction in real time, turning their real-world agony into pop gold. For Christine, surviving this period meant constructing a completely separate persona. To the outside world, and even to the engineers in the studio, she was the steady hand on the wheel. She was the one who would calmly sit at the piano, sipping a glass of champagne, waiting out the explosive arguments between the other members. But that calm was a mask. To endure the sheer, suffocating weight of recording an album with an ex-spouse playing bass just 3 feet away, Christine adopted a lifestyle of profound compartmentalization. She famously noted that her daily fuel of choice during this era was substance and champagne, a chemical cocktail designed to keep her perfectly balanced between manic rock star energy and numb, elegant composure. It was a functional addiction, a curated toolkit used to dull the sharp edges of a deeply unnatural living situation. The sheer scale of the tours that followed the release of Rumours meant that Christine was effectively trapped inside a golden cage. The band traveled in a cocoon of unimaginable wealth. They leased private planes where the interior was outfitted with living rooms and fully stocked bars. They took over entire floors of luxury hotels, hiring security teams to keep the outside world away. On stage, they performed to 80,000 screaming fans a night, bathed in blinding white light and adulation. But off stage, the isolation was total. Christine found herself living the exact trajectory of a male rock star, but internalizing the unique, crushing costs that came with being a woman in that position during the 70s. The ultimate expression of this sacrifice came during the height of their global dominance. While navigating the grueling, multi-year touring,